it was supposed to be 30 laps, and they cut it down to 25 because the condition of the track, there was just far more racing on the track than had been experienced ever before. So they cut it down to 25 laps. Of course, all of the hometowners figured and wanted Earl Wagner to win because he was driving for Dean Sylvester, and Dean had built this radical, super modified, most of it was made out of aluminum, and it was super lightweight. They had discovered even back then that the lighter the car was, the more speed they could get with the engines that they had. So Earl was the favorite with Dean's car, but then he had been out-timed on Friday by two other cars, Audie Schwartz from Muncie, Indiana, and of course Roy Robbins, who won it. There was not ever any kind of inversion at that point in time for a feature. So Robbins and Schwartz started on the front row, and Wagner was in the row right behind them. And Schwartz led to begin with, and then Wagner got by, to the amazement of the crowd. He got by Robbins, but then Robbins came roaring right back, past him, eventually past Schwartz fairly early in the race, and then held the top spot all the rest of the way.
Were there any cautions or anything?
Yeah, there were cautions and reds because there were wrecks. And well, in fact, at the very beginning of the race, when they were just doing some parade laps, back then, as those of us who were around back then, they sold pop by the bottle, and the bottle was made of glass. Someone had thrown a bottle out on the racetrack and it busted, and Wagner ran over it and cut down a tire. So they allowed him to change it and get back in line in his position because it was a factor that was beyond control. And so it took a while to get that going because they didn't change tires as quickly back then as they do now. Well, you know, I didn't get to meet him at that time, but it was like, it wasn't a big deal for him to win that race. And of course, no one knew that 57 years later, we'd still be running that race and we'd be paying a gigantic purse, let alone a gigantic sum of money to the winner. So in talking with Roy later in years, he said, well, he had won a number of races that paid $1,000 to win, which is what the first Nationals paid. And so it was not a big deal to him. And over the years, as time passed by, it became a big deal to people who wanted to know the history of the Nationals, that here's this man from Kentucky who won it, and he doesn't even think that it was much of a deal. So, but Roy was a very humble man, very, very humble. He ran a lot in this part of the country during the race seasons of those years. His home track was in Indiana, but he put the car on the trailer, open trailers back then, and he traveled. He was an outlaw. He went to where the money was being paid, and he ran a lot of races in Texas, Kansas, Missouri, Arkansas. He was Oklahoma too. He was quite an outlaw before the Outlaws.
Where does 1961 rank among your favorite Nationals?
It may be my favorite because it was so unique. The racing was fairly good. Of course, I was a Wagner fan, and he didn't win, which was a bummer to me. And I didn't even know what bummer was back then, but that's what it was. And but it was so different. There, you know, the racing at Knoxville, weekly racing, the features were 15 laps, and here was a race that was supposed to be twice that length, with all these cars and drivers you'd never heard or seen before. It was quite a sight to see those cars. And in '61, there were just over 50 cars that had come to Knoxville to compete. So it was an amazing sight to look at. And most of the infield at that time was not even mowed. It was just a weed patch. And no concrete pads, nothing like that. So yeah, it would rank in as one of my favorites simply because it was the first and because it was just an awesome sight for a young kid like I was.